Okay, so step number one with this project was to create the 10 thumbnail sketches, 10 thumbnail sketches of patterns in nature. Okay, here's one of the students from second period. Here's a student work from first period. And then you're going to go in and try out some different watercolor techniques. Again, use some that are more opaque, using more of the pigment in the paint, and some that are more diluted, meaning that you're using more water. Okay, just test those out, some of the techniques. I'm going to show you some techniques in watercolor. You're going to then choose one of these to enlarge so that it fills the entire piece of paper. So actually I'm going to be doing a cross-section of a tree stump where it shows the rings. Okay, so again, you're going to do it so that it goes from edge to edge. It goes off of the paper. You're going to enlarge that one thumbnail so that it fills up the entire paper. With this particular painting, I am using a photo reference that you can see here on this photo reference, and you'll see that it has a lot of yellows and oranges and browns and reds that are in here. And then this area is very, very gray color, very light gray, and there's a few dots of darker browns in there. Notice at the very center, it's very, very light, and the gray is very light. What you want to do is, with watercolor, you always want to start with your lightest light colors and then go to the darker colors, okay? Because with watercolor, there's no way to erase the color. And so with this, I'm starting by diluting, using a lot of water. And so I'm just taking my brush, I'm putting it into the water, and I'm going to dilute the paper, so meaning that I'm going to do a wet into wet technique, wet into wet. So I'm adding water. Now with this paper, it will buckle a bit because of the water, and that's fine. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to start with my lighter colors, like I was talking about earlier. So I'm going to start with the yellow, and notice that I'm adding a lot of water. And then I'm just going to start brushing that in. Again, I can go lighter, and then I'm going to start lighter and then go a little bit darker, and just keep adding to it. You want to build it up that way. And then with those, there's a little bit of oranges in there, so I'm adding just a drop of orange, right, mixing it right here on the palette area of the watercolor set. We get some oranges in there. Notice that when I do the wet into wet, it allows it to blend. Okay, and I've got those colors going all the way down. Then I'm going to start adding the brown in right into that orange. And you'll see, so I'm going from the lightest lights to darkest dark. Now, notice the center is pretty much white. There's a few little lines in there, but I'm gonna keep the center. If you want something white in a watercolor, you have to paint around it and leave it the white of the paper. Because you'll notice in your watercolor set, there is no white color. You just leave the white of the paper. You paint around it. Okay? And notice I'm going darker and darker with each sort of layer, and I'm just painting it right in, letting that blend together. Okay, it's going to give you a much deeper colors by blending. So you can also, some of the areas that are already dry, notice I'm going back in and starting to add more color into the areas that are dry already. And that is a wet into dry. Okay, so we did the wet into wet, which was I added water to the paper and letting it using it with a lot of water, wet into wet, and then I was using wet into the dry. And you'll see that it slowly starts to build up with the color. For more information about your journals and about doing thumbnail sketches, go to the Davis Digital, and I will show you what pages that is and also how to get on to Davis Digital book for more information about the journals and about thumbnail sketches. Make sure that you upload a photo of your 10 completed thumbnail sketches, okay? So again, that was step 1. This is going into step 2, and then I'll start the next video of step 3 once I complete this. Okay, and then here is the completed, my watercolor of a texture that appears in nature, the cross-section of a tree here. I forgot to mention it also helps if you have a paper towel with you when you're doing watercolor, just in case you get an area where you went too dark too quickly. While it's still wet, you have to dab it out while it's still wet, but you can get some of that color out of there if you went too dark too quickly. But you can see I used a variety of techniques. You can see the wet into wet over here, some of the dry brush to do some of these lines. All right, so I think I'm going to stop here as far as this step goes.